Welcome to another edition of 1 in 15. As ever, I'm going to get my guests to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Simon Cross, and I am a writer, researcher, and yeah, kind of a people person, let's say.
Brilliant. It's great to have you on board, Simon. As you know, I've been asking people what their one big thing, the thing that's kind of been dominating or just permeating in their thoughts recently.
Yeah.
What's your one big thing?
So I think my one big thing is the sort of changing nature of connection. The amount that I actually see other people has changed a lot over the last few weeks. Whether that's my work is kind of like some of it is face to face with people, some of it is very much not. And then over the last few weeks, the kind of the ability to see people face to face has really changed. So
Oh.
that's been the one big thing for me, I think.
And how, I mean, obviously we've all experienced that in different ways. Some people are much more vulnerable and have had to shield themselves really robustly. Others have kind of been able to flirt on the edges of social interaction. How was that? How has that change expressed itself, and what are the impacts of that change?
Um, yeah, I mean, so there's been a number of impacts. There's been some practical impacts in terms of my work. So some of my work is face to face work. Like mentoring young people, working with community groups, those
Mm.
kind of things, and that's all disappeared. So the mentoring program that I run um, had to switch to telephone mentoring, which was a really strange switch to have to make.
Sure.
Um, but because of the kind of way that everything is safeguarded these days, it's something we had to do and just had to get on with.
Yeah.
Um, but then some of the other things, so for instance, a person I wouldn't normally see so much of is an old lady who's part of a church group that I'm involved with. Um, and I, through a sort of convoluted set of circumstances, ended up buying food for her every week.
Yeah.
And she's 93, uh, and obviously very much a kind of at-risk person. But I came to realise that for her, one of the major risks was that she just didn't have anybody to talk to,
Sure.
pretty much. Didn't really see anybody, didn't go out at all. Um, saw nobody day by day. So I ended up sort of visiting her every week, and so for the last few weeks, I've spent a good chunk of Friday morning sat in her front room,
Yeah.
chattering away, which is something that I wouldn't normally have had either time for or it just wouldn't have happened really.
Sure.
So yeah, so things that sort of changes of that sort have been interesting. But then most of the time I just see my family, see the same
Yeah.
with the faces all the time, and I find I'm not dissatisfied with that. I'm quite happy with that most of the time.
Yeah. It's really interesting. I mean, a number of these conversations I've had with people on this kind of series of interviews, there's been some common threads, as you'd expect, and this kind of nature of the kind of the opportunity and the challenge that we're being presented with. And obviously in the early days, understandably all we could think about maybe was the challenges that we were having to overcome. How for a lot of us, in very real terms, this has been a traumatic experience. Things that we've taken for granted, things that we've thought we were in control of, have suddenly been taken away from us, or the context of how we interrelate with those things has changed radically. But it's been interesting in the last couple of weeks, maybe particularly, that people have started to see some of the opportunities that are presenting themselves. So even with this kind of the changing nature of relationships, and your initial kind of reflection on it, I can see some things that you're mourning, some things that you're noticing that you maybe didn't, or took for granted before, or didn't have the opportunity or the inclination for, that have now become kind of embedded in your behaviour.
Mm.
So where do you think the kind of the tension is, or where do you think the pulls to kind of return to how we used to do things are? What things might be missed if we just kind of blindly go back to how we did it before? What opportunities might we miss if that's what happens?
Yeah, I think to answer that question, I've got to sort of reflect on the idea of pace.
Mm-hmm.
Andy, this is a really sort of strange way for us to be talking, isn't it? We don't normally talk as seriously as this.
No.
But nevertheless, I'll carry on. Yeah, I think one of the major things that's changed has been the pace of life. So having some of my work sort of disappear, or not disappear, be paused or whatever, has meant that there's been more space in parts of my life that hasn't been there before. Now that's not to say my life was particularly hectic compared to a lot of people's.
Sure.
Because it's not. Because I deliberately try and keep space in my life, but there's been even more of that space.
Yeah.
And that has meant that I've been able to sort of choose to prioritize things which I wouldn't have otherwise done, in the normal course of events.
Sure.
Can't remember what question was now.
No, I think it's about this kind of nature of if we're trying to take seriously both the challenges and the opportunities that this changing nature of relationship presents us.
So that's right. Yeah, so that's right. So the change of pace has been an opportunity as well as a challenge, practical challenge.
Yeah.
A challenge in a number of ways. How do you sort of maintain relationships with people when you can't see them? Blah blah blah. But then also has been an opportunity for me to be able to say, well, I can change the way I operate my work day. I can change the way I allot time to different people. Those sorts of things. That has been both the challenge and the opportunity embedded in the whole thing.
Sure.
Which is an interesting tension, creative tension.
Yeah, and that's for me. That's one of the things that's been again the kind of a common thread and quite an energizing one actually in the interviews that I've conducted is this reality that it feels like there's an opportunity, like genuinely a once in a lifetime opportunity. We could never have planned for the size of it. And this opportunity to actually stop and take stock of how we are, who we are, how we interrelate with people, the opportunities that we take, the opportunities that we choose to miss or are just too busy to miss. So one of the things that I've been reflecting on in terms of the changing style of relationships is I'm really noticing where I've got deep relationships with people, and I'm really noticing how the methodology of changing or of interrelating with those people hasn't changed actually substantively. So I'm thinking of friends, I'm thinking of you, people like you actually. We worked together a good number of years ago now. We haven't been colleagues for 3 or 4 years. And we don't physically spend much time. There's a festival once a year that we quite often would briefly catch up at, but the rest of the time we don't physically see each other. And we have random and certainly much more kind of cheeky and bantery conversations most of the time on the phone. That's the kind of brief interaction we have. But I still feel like there's a depth of friendship here. I feel we get each other. We love each other. And I'm really noticing those friendships. People who maybe I don't see more than once in 10 years, who nonetheless kind of the depth of my relationship with those people is still sustained. So the kind of the physical change of not being able to go to the pub with them, because I don't go to the pub with you because you don't drink and you live in Grimsby, and I'm in East London. So it's not a practical outworking of how we interrelate. And then the flip side of that is how shallow some of those relationships are that I thought were a bit stronger. Interesting. I was chatting to a church leader recently who's one of their strap lines for their church is something about, we're all about the depth of relationship. And he was sharing with, I'm not going to name who they are for obvious reasons. He was sharing with me that it's been quite a challenge because they've discovered actually that they thought relationships in their community were really, really central and really, really strong. But the reality is nobody really knows each other. And they're not really sure who the vulnerable people are, apart from the really obvious vulnerable people. They're not really sure who's got capacity to have that conversation with the elderly lady or to do the shopping for that person. And that's been quite a challenge to them. And then obviously when, as things return to something a bit more like our previous pre-lockdown experience, that minister, amongst many other people in many other situations, is having to say, can we carry on as we did before? Because it wasn't authentic. Actually, we thought it was. We weren't like living a lie knowingly, but actually, on reflection, this once in a lifetime opportunity has said to us, you know, how you thought you were is not how you were.
Yeah, that's right, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, it's interesting to sort of. I've seen the same thing around me. I think though that I have not been surprised in any of the kind of relationships that I've got,
Sure.
if you like. I don't think I've come across anybody who I've gone, wow, I thought, you know, I was much closer to them and now they're gone. Because one of the things that I do is I work at, because as you say, I live quite a long way away from a lot of people. So I don't see a lot of my friends, I don't see anyone. So I've had to kind of over the years to sort of develop that sort of means of relating to people anyway.
Yeah.
I wouldn't see most of my friends week to week, even month to month. So so that in itself has been reassuring to me, I suppose, that actually, you know, those friendships that I've built with the likes of yourself and others are still there, still strong, and I still find myself speaking to the same people who I would normally be speaking to mostly. It's the people who you work with sometimes, I think, who, for me, that's where the differences lie.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about that, those differences that are presenting themselves.
Well, I suppose, you know, the reality is with work that it seems much more important than it actually is a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And so when it gets taken away, you think, oh, actually, it wasn't as be all and end all as all that.
Sure.
And so there's that kind of, this is what I was saying about a sort of creative tension in it all. You start to think, oh, actually, I could probably do without that, and move on. And I have had like sort of epiphany moments like that before in my life, where I've kind of, what I tend to do, as you know, Andy, is I tend to sort of build up stuff, and I think, oh no, I've got too much stuff now.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to try and get rid of it. And those are these kind of epiphany moments where you think, oh, I'm going to have to shed some stuff. And then you do, and you think, oh, actually, it didn't really matter.
Yeah.
You know, it's like that work that I was like, oh, I've got to keep doing this. Actually, it's fine that it stopped because everything has a season, and, you know, for its time, and now it's gone. And so this has been another one of those moments for me, but certainly not the only one in my life. I've known a few. But they always seem to come sort of within a measure of sort of a crisis time of some sort, whether it's a personal crisis or an international crisis, as we're now experiencing, or whatever. There's something like that has to happen. It forces you to reevaluate, and then that in itself is a really helpful and productive time. It's always a bit painful, but it's good for you. It's good.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, and I mean that's really we've probably got about a minute and a half left, and that's like a really helpful place to kind of land. I think is that kind of, you know, this ever-present reality that, you know, that we're in a place of opportunity and challenge together. That it's not the first time, it won't be the last time we've been through this, albeit the scale of the crisis is unprecedented. Oh no, I've said that word. But you know, we weren't expecting it. Like a lot of crises, actually, we are getting through it. Like a lot of crises, actually, and it is ultimately up to us to kind of to take hold of that challenge and to say, you know, what can I put down? You know, where is the bits that the stuff's got too much that I can put down? What parts of my work or my professional, my personal life, don't have the worth that I was giving them, and I might still have to do it. You know, I might still have to do that admin or whatever that I don't, you know. It must still have importance, but it's about putting it in that kind of scale.
And it's you know, you hear it all the time, people saying, oh, all of a sudden, you know, now all of a sudden, because we're in a situation, things can happen that previously people said, oh no, we can't do that, because all of a sudden everybody can now work from home, you know, or, you know, whatever it might be. When these moments happen, it creates that possibility, doesn't it? And we can say, yeah, actually, we can do this. We can reimagine things.
Yeah.
Boom.
Excellent. Like all the conversations, there's loads of stuff. I'm thinking about loads of stuff. I feel really energized it, but we've run out of time. So
Yep.
Simon, bless you. You've been a fantastic guest.